G'day guys, thank you for joining us here at NDC Sydney 2018 for this great Ask Me Anything live stream. This AMA session is a chance for you at home and our live audience to ask questions of our speakers and get any questions you like answered live. So we're also very excited to be sharing this space with .NET Rocks, Carl Franklin and Richard Campbell. They'll be recording live interviews for their podcast too. So remember to check out the full agenda on the NDC Sydney website. And starting off, I have the pleasure of interviewing our first guest, the NDC Keynote speaker, Dylan Beattie. Dylan is a Microsoft MVP. He's a regular speaker at lots of user groups and conferences all over the world. He's spoken about plenty of topics from continuous delivery, Conway's Law, the history of web, federated authentication, hypermedia APIs, cat videos, and when he's not wrangling code, Dylan plays the guitar, writes songs about code, which are quite funny. And hello Dylan and welcome.
Hey Adam, thank you for having me.
Did you enjoy that keynote?
It was a lot of fun.
It was, yeah.
It's one of those talks that, like I said at the beginning, it starts off with someone asks me a question, how does this stuff work? I'm like, I don't know. And to me, that's like, red rag to a bull. It's like, I don't know. This is unacceptable. I have to know. And so you go and you start digging, and so it's probably a couple of months of research and investigation, and lots of help from people online. I was going on Twitter and I was emailing people, and I was like, I think I get the signal processing bit. Is this right? And they'd be like, no, it's not. And I'd be like, okay, help me get this. And chipping away at a lot of these very these complicated ideas that we don't even think about anymore because they work all the time. And when they don't work, it's like the magic is broken, And particularly with modern smartphones and stuff, there's so little in them now which is user serviceable. It's basically a magic box that works or it doesn't. And as developers, I love the fact that it's now possible to just assemble components and modules and build these incredibly smart apps and experiences. But also, I still think there's value in, what's the mantra? You understand one level of abstraction below where you're working. So, if you're working with ORM, you should understand SQL. If you're working with SQL, you should understand table schemas and stuff like that. If you're working on table schema design, you should understand sort of physical file system allocation and the effect that has on database performance. If you're working on that stuff, you should probably know about RAID drivers and so, whatever you're doing, there's stuff one level lower that may bite you if you're not watching out for it. And so I kind of, took that principle and ran with it. I'm like, let's just keep punching through the abstraction until we get down to physics and then build it back up from there.
That's incredible. It kind of starts with, would you describe it as zeros to ones, all the way through to the internet, all the way through to modern day receiving a cat video on your phone as you're on a train. Of that whole journey that you went through, which bit was the best bit that you learnt a lot from?
So the stuff about signal processing and how cellular networks actually work. I'd never really stopped to think about it, because you just wireless, you assume it's radio, and then you're like, okay, well, I guess, and I never really thought about it beyond that point. Just kind of it works. And so when you start digging into how we get things like, mobile broadband, it's astonishing. It really is. The amount of innovation and, the stuff. So in the talk there, I kind of outlined some of the algorithms and the protocols and the signal encoding stuff we use. And then you think, you're doing it up on a screen with like 1 beat per second, like a 1 hertz signal so everyone can see what's going on. And then you think that your phone is doing that on 19 million cycles a second. We're talking, megahertz and gigahertz spectrum here. And domestic Wi-Fi, one of the weird things about radio is the electromagnetic spectrum. You have, cosmic rays, you have X-rays, you have visible light, you have heat, you have radio. It's just the same stuff at a different frequency. The stuff in your microwave that cooks food is exactly the same kind of energy as the Wi-Fi in your house, which is why when I was a student in halls and we had a dodgy microwave that wasn't shielded properly, Wi-Fi didn't work if you ran the microwave, because it's the same stuff and all the Wi-Fi devices are just like, I'm getting this really crazy loud signal that's strong enough to warm up some chicken and I can't make any sense of the data. And that, people are like, no, it must be a trick. You're lying. It's like, no, that's really how it works.
You had Wi-Fi when you went to university? You must be young.
Years after university, it was. There was an overlap between getting Wi-Fi and having a good microwave at some point in my history.
Awesome. I was sitting next to, in the keynote,
Yeah.
Costa from our office, who's Russian, and you were going through the Russian alphabet, how it translated from basically our Latin characters to their Cyrillic characters, and he was saying, oh, I didn't know that. And maybe that's why I've had so many problems encoding Russian in my life.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
No, it's because, the Russian and the Cold War and the Soviet Union, and you got there's scientists on both sides and engineers trying to fix it, but there's also politics and, all these really kind of complicated things. You think, how hard can it be to encode plain text as ones and zeros? And then you're like, well, what's the text for? Are you worried about it falling into the wrong hands? Are you encrypting it? Where's it going to go? Do they know? Are they expecting it? There's Joel Spolsky did this great essay about, there's something like he opens with someone files a support ticket saying our email system doesn't work in Chinese. And he's like, what? You can have email in Chinese? And it's the absolute minimum every developer should know about Unicode or something is what it's called.
Right.
And it's great. Check it out. It's online. It's really, really good reading.
Awesome. Anyway, moving on to developers.
Yes.
Okay, and developers working together. I assume you've worked in some good teams and some bad teams. Can you tell us about the best team you ever worked on and why that was a great team?
I wouldn't say, it's a difficult question because the understanding of what a team is to me always seems to, like, you're not a team until it's good. Until it gets good, you're just a bunch of people who've been put together and someone has said, work on this and stuff. The teams that I've worked in where stuff has kind of really clicked has been where everyone understood what we were trying to accomplish. I think that's the biggest thing. It's something that I do a lot of thinking about in terms of recruitment and motivation, how to keep people engaged, and it's that thing. What is it that makes developers excited about getting up and going to work in the morning or whatever it is they do? And I think a big part of it is vision. You have to understand what it is that you're trying to achieve. What's the thing you're trying to change in the world? You want to be able to look back in a couple of years and go, we did that. And part of it is context, because you're going to go in and you're like, well, they told us we were here to build the next generation of streaming video platform, but it feels a lot like we're just dealing with help desk tickets. And they're also questions that when the team start asking them, you push them up, and they can outline problems or gaps in the way the organization's thinking. And so vision is one thing, context is one thing. What are we trying to do? The stuff we're doing today, how does that fit? And culture is another kind of big thing. You want it's easy to take a bunch of people who aren't really happy and they're working on problems that don't matter and think that because you've got a foosball table, it's, and that's actually kind of the wrong way around. You want the kind of culture where if people want a foosball table, they'll chip in and get their own foosball table because they like working here and they're happy and everyone's like, let's just get one, how hard can it be? And then, the other interesting thing about our industry is a lot of people in it have this real passion for technology. And there are days when, certainly even in my career, where me and a couple of people I've been working with have been like, this isn't interesting, this isn't exciting, One example stands out. A couple of years ago, I was working on a team who were doing stuff with Microsoft Dynamics. And Dynamics CRM is a bit of a controversial platform. It has its fans, it has its detractors.
We use it.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that kind of it solves 80% of your problem, and then the other 20% it becomes much, much harder than if you were just starting with nothing, because you're constrained by the execution environment and the limitations and the sandbox thing and custom plugins, all this kind of stuff. And so we started building a delivery pipeline for it. We're like, how do we get the same level of kind of one-click deployment and revision control for CRM plugins that we're used to having for all our other software? And that was just, the only interesting part of that was the technical challenge involved in doing it. But it was cool. And, the team was working on it. We all understood what we were trying to do. We all understood that when we got it right, it was going to make life easier and we'd be able to ship stuff faster. So yeah, that was fun.
So the current job you work at is
Yeah.
Spotlight in the UK,
It's Skills Matter now. So I left Spotlight at the end of last year,
right?
and went to be a CTO at Skills Matter, which is a training conference company that we're the largest community of developers in Europe who actually meet
Right.
regularly. As in, we have a venue in London where we have meetups and we organize our own events and conferences and stuff there. And so it's this sort of interesting blend of sort of online collaboration stuff, which is a lot of the work that I'm gearing up to do with the team there, but also, you know, physical people coming and meeting up face to face.
Right.
So.
And what made you make that change? Because you're at Spotlight for a long time.
I've been at Spotlight for a long time. It was kind of time to move on. It was, you know, you stay somewhere long enough. There's Alberto Brandolini wrote this great essay about the Dungeon Master, which is a kind of organizational anti-pattern, which is kind of the person who they built version 1 of the system, and they know where all the kind of bodies are buried, and they understand all the constraints of the system and stuff, and how actually that can end up being an impediment to progress. And you know, after being there for sort of 15 years, there's a level of organizational maturity, I think, where the things which are important are no longer exciting, and the things which are exciting are not immediately important. You know, when I joined Spotlight, I was webmaster, and literally I wrote web pages in classic ASP, I built databases, I made network cable, I plugged in servers, I ran the network stack, the DNS, the whole thing.
You're like the sysadmin and the developer.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Which you could just about get away with. And you know, we were in an interesting position. You know, Spotlight was a very well-respected company within its industry.
Yes.
We had very, very good positive relationships with a lot of our customers, you know, first name terms with people who'd ring you up and ask for help with stuff. And so we sort of got to invest quite gradually in putting things online and turning it from a paper-based publishing business into a digital business. And yeah, you know, in the early days, there's a certain thrill about, you know, like staying all night, getting a broken server up and running again, which in organizations at a certain point in their growth, maybe it makes sense to kind of save the budget you would have spent on business continuity because you don't know yet what's going to hit you, and you're just like, well, if it happens, it happens, and we're offline for 12 hours, and we'll get the thing back up somehow. And you know, it's a part of that appeal to me.
Right.
The sort of,
Is that one of your best practices?
Well, it's a question of, if you have a very limited budget, what is the most valuable? It's all about validating assumptions early, you know, and understanding that and taking it into account in the way you plan your strategy. If you've got almost nothing to invest in IT, what's the most valuable thing you could be doing? Is it business continuity, or is it validating that people actually want the service you're doing, you know? And then, you know, the flip side, the thing that I think a lot of organizations get wrong is they forget that the MVP is actually just the beginning of a very long and expensive commitment. And they think that the MVP is, we've launched it, it's done. And it's, I was chatting to somebody the other day, actually somebody I met on the plane over here, about...
You're one of those people that chat to the person next to you.
They started it. They said, what are you doing in Australia? I'm like, I'm there for a software conference, and we got chatting a little bit, and they were sort of saying, you know, Ruby on Rails got this bad reputation because it didn't work for Twitter. And I was like, if you're not choosing Ruby because you think Twitter was a failed company, there are so many things wrong with your decision-making system, you know. Yes. Twitter's assumption was, if we build 140-character microblogging, people will want to use it. And it was a tremendously successful platform that rapidly outgrew the tech they had used to validate their assumption, and so they had to invest heavily in re-engineering it. And you know, I think we always have to be prepared for that. The best thing you can possibly do, if your business model is rational, then the increased traffic should mean increased revenue, should mean you can circle around and start reinvesting in the things where you cut corners in the first place. And so, yeah, you know, early days of my career, I did a lot of work for companies with minimal budget who were like, look, we have basically nothing, what can we get? And that's kind of fun, you know, you get to play the hero a little bit and be like, well, yeah, we can't have it for you. It's like, you know, Scotty in Star Trek. It'll take 6 weeks, but we don't have 6 weeks, so we'll do it for you in 2. And that kind of stuff. But then when people start relying on the services you're providing, when it's greenfield, you can get away with stuff.
That's right.
Because people didn't have it last month. So you roll it out and then there's a problem. But once you become a vital part of somebody else's working day or somebody else's livelihood, you know, you have to look at a very kind of different proposition model. Releases become riskier. Everything kind of has degree of discipline and stuff around it. And yeah, it gets mature. It's not about kind of growth and stuff anymore. It's primarily about safeguarding the services people are relying on. And growth has always been the stuff I'm more interested in, you know.
Awesome. So you have done a fair bit of thinking about what makes developers unhappy.
Yeah.
Is that from your own experiences of your own team, or just talking to other developers, you know, and just aggregating Twitter? Like where did this originate from?
It's all kinds of different, you know, spheres of conversation that feed into each other. You know, part of it is I've basically been recruiting since 2004, as I think a lot of people in tech and growing organizations have. So part of it is about how do you sort of have that conversation with a prospective candidate that is positive, but also you don't want to lie to anybody. So you start, and you know, if you reach a point where you literally can't think of anything true to put in a job advert, you're kind of like, well, we should probably fix the organization first before we go out and try and persuade more people to come and join it. And then, you know, those conversations then feed into one-to-ones with the team. And then those conversations feed into discussions at an event like this. And, you know, people sat around in the hotel bar exchanging war stories at 1 o'clock in the morning, that kind of thing. And it's about kind of taking, I think, what you can learn and share from one context, and then sharing that yourself in a different context and seeing what people come back with. And, you know, you just go up to people like, you know, what are you working on? Are you enjoying it? And you just learn an enormous amount from those two simple questions.
So tell us, what makes devs unhappy? Tell me some of the major things.
SharePoint.
There's a cheap one. Office 365 now.
No, it's, I mean, one of the anti-patterns I see played out again and again is being managed by people who don't understand the value that developers can create, which leads to, you know, if you have a boss who doesn't understand software, doesn't understand the kind of how software can affect revenue stream, they kind of go with a very kind of old school micromanagement, like, I don't understand what you're doing, I don't understand how it works, but I can tell if you're not at your desk at 9 o'clock. So I'm going to focus on the easy things to measure. You know, and that rapidly, you know, we developers are spoiled in terms of the job opportunities, and organizations don't retain good people for very long if the only thing that they're measuring is, you know, it's like the old, how many lines of code did you write this week? And you're like, well, actually, I found an entire module that was riddled with security holes, so I deleted it. So my productivity for the week is negative 12,000. Put that in your spreadsheet, you know, and they're like, well, we're not paying you to delete code. And it's like, I don't think you understand what you're paying us for. I think you kind of think money and developers go in and profit comes out the other side, and you don't really understand it. And you know, there are so many things, product roadmap and technology strategy, and you know, doing a greenfield project, you're like, well, language, platform, hosting, all these kinds of things. You want to engage people in the conversation, but also a little bit of the role is thinking, well, in 2 or 3 years' time, is this going to turn out to be a mistake or?
So if the number one thing that developers have problems with is, you know, customers or bosses that don't understand them, what should they do?
So I think as developers there's people I've met who are in their, you know, junior devs, early 20s, who are phenomenally good at writing code to solve problems. And one of the things that I think we, as an industry, have optimized for over the last couple of decades is this kind of, you know, headphones on, in the zone, typing away. And actually being a good developer, it has so much more, you know, situational awareness and understanding, collaborating. And I think, you know, devs, if you take the time to try and understand those things, as well as just the role that code plays, and that can be a difficult thing because, you know, we're developers, we like to build stuff. There was a conversation I remember years ago. Someone came to me, one of the managers at my old place, and said, we need a secure document storage system. And I was like, how secure? They're like, it needs to be like, not even the systems administrators can read it. It's for really sensitive negotiation contracts and stuff. And I was like, how many copies of these contracts do you need? And they said 1. I'm like, put it in a safe. And they're like, what? I'm like, you have a fireproof safe in your office. Don't even think about using software to solve this problem. Print it out, put it in the safe. 1, you have the keys. You know nobody else has the keys. 2, the safe is fireproof. You don't need to worry about security on backups and stuff. And 3, you know, the world we live in, we have mechanisms in law and insurance and stuff for what happens if the fireproof safe gets destroyed in the fire. You know, that's understood. Whereas something like we missed a spot when we built the secure document encryption system and this contract ended up being emailed to the wrong person, there's no precedent for how to deal with the fallout from that kind of incident. And you know, that's, I think, one of the hardest things as a developer is saying the solution to this problem is not software. And no matter how much I would enjoy the challenge of building it, that's not the most valuable thing that we could be doing here. And the nice thing about that is that then, you know, you get the opportunity when you do sit down to build something of it is valuable. You understand how it fits into the objectives of what you and your team and your organization are trying to accomplish. So,
one of the things I often will tell a developer to do is to allocate the appropriate time to explain to customers and make them more educated.
yeah.
Like, it's funny how developers will sometimes spend, like, 2 or 3 on a team will spend 2 week sprint, work really hard, and then they do the sprint review with the product owner there, a couple of stakeholders, and they're just on the fly showing stuff. And then, like, they've spent, say 160 hours, and they give it 20 minutes to prepare what they're going to go through. It's a disproportionate amount of time.
Yeah.
And they don't, their demos fail, they've just checked in just before. They don't put their best foot forward. They lose confidence with the product owner, and they don't explain it the best way. If they've explained it once or twice before to one of their colleagues who maybe, explain like I'm 10 or 15 years old, very slowly and critically, and then do it again. It's really important. Sometimes those same developers, you call them for a meeting with the stakeholders, kind of a semi-board meeting, and they'll say, "Oh, I'll just use a couple of PowerPoints that I've winged together, and I'll wing it." This is the first time these people are meeting with them, and they're giving it also a very small, disproportionate amount of time, maybe an hour before that meeting, to try to wing it. It's just not the best way to explain to people who are spending a lot of money on big salaries for a group of guys to work on a product.
No, it's the whole, explanation. Something that I do now for all kinds of things is, like conference talks, meetings, anything like that, is I'll sit down in advance and I'll write what I want to say. And it's not a script, you never stick to it. But there's something about that process of just putting down, when I do a new talk now, when I start putting something together, the first thing I do is I sit down and I just write. And I know, because I've done this a lot and I've watched transcripts, I speak at about 1,000 characters per minute. So if I can do 60,000 characters without stopping, it means I could have improvised a 1-hour talk on that topic. And I never hit that, You get about 15 minutes worth of material, and then you're like, okay, so 1, I don't know quite as much about this as I thought I did. 2, this needs restructuring and moving around. And you gotta move in blocks and stuff. And even little things like, you're doing a farewell speech for a colleague who's leaving or something. Just the difference between standing up and winging it, or just having some idea in your head of the points you want to hit and in what order, it makes so much difference to how kind of fluent it comes across. And product demos and things are the same. I've seen demos on Teams where they turned up and everyone's like, what are we going to show them? And it's like, you mean you don't know? Like,
that's true.
Why? You've been working for 2 weeks. And one of the things that I'm pushing hard at the moment is trying to get, when we're doing stories and things, I'm like, who wants this? Because one of the luxuries of working in a relatively small organization with everyone in the same building is the role of the product owner as a sort of proxy is, one, they can become a bottleneck so easily, particularly when they're growing and juggling a whole bunch of different things. But also a lot of the time, it's the person who really wants the thing, they're in the same office as you, and you can go and talk to them. And so, instead of the sort of acceptance criteria thing, it's like, well, implement this, but then go and show it to this person, this person, this person. It's this the sort of classic user story format. As person, I want this, so that something. And Jenny Martin, who's one of my colleagues at Skills Matter, did this great talk at New Crafts in Paris, where she puts up a slide that's like the quintessentially bad user story. As a user, I want a system so I can use the system. And I just thought, I've seen stories that look like that. And I'm like, who's the person?
Or almost every PBI says, as a developer, I want, You know, if you can't envisage the person who's using it, you've got troubles.
And it's like, you know, most of these people, that they have names. We know exactly who they are. You know, as Sharon, I want a spreadsheet sorted by this so that I don't have to spend 3 hours every week on the telephone. It's like, all right, brilliant. If you don't understand it, she's over there. Go talk to her, you know. It's so easy, I think, to... One, it's surprisingly easy to lose sight of that and just go into this kind of siloed mentality on a team. But it's also really easy to break back out of it. All you're like is like, look, we're gonna break it up a little. We're gonna go and actually chat to some people and say, hey, you know, we got this story, this idea for a thing that your boss says to their boss says to their boss that maybe you want. What do you actually want? And they'll be like, oh no, I don't want that at all. The problem I have is here. And you sit and you watch them and you're like, yeah, I see. And also I see why doing this wouldn't have helped you in the slightest. So, and again, you know, it's about autonomy and kind of, you know, trusting people to, directing them to say, if you, the developers, can keep these people happy, then we are delivering value because these people are important.
Right.
And that to me is an autonomous team. It's like you identify who are the stakeholders, and the stakeholders here aren't managers and proxies. You know, back at Spotlight when I first started there, we had a handful, maybe a dozen VIP casting directors. You know, Pinewood Studios, BBC TV, Royal Shakespeare Company. And kind of, you know, the unspoken remit of the job is if these people phone you, you do what they want. And most of the time, they'd phone and they'd have some quite interesting requests for things they'd like to be able to do on our software. And, you know, this being the glory days, the wild frontier of classic ASP, you could actually, on more than one occasion, you could log into the live server and change the code while you still had them on the phone and refresh, and they'd be like, wow. And 5 years later, they're still turning up to meetings going, it's fantastic, I phoned them and they rewrote their website for me while I was on the phone. And you'd be amazed how long the kind of positive goodwill from a thing like that happens, you know. In terms of change control, it's a nightmare, but if you're the only one there, you know.
Right. So let's step down into other things that make devs unhappy.
Yeah.
Tell us about roadblocks and other day-to-day issues that make developers unhappy.
So one of the biggest things I think is, you know, you complete a piece of work or you fill in a feature or something, you submit something and it gets rejected or sent back for reasons that were not captured at the time. And I think that's another thing where it's the nature of that collaboration, it's all about the length of the feedback loop. Because, you know, when a feedback loop is tight, you've got two people sat, you know, you and a product owner sat in front of the same thing and they're like, yeah, change that, move that, move that, move that. And, you know, I try to optimize for environments where you've got lo-fi wireframing, everything's very quick to change and you can actually get that consensus early. And then you do the heavy lifting, the implementation. If that feedback cycle time ends up being weeks, then you get to a point you think you're done with something and a week later you get, no, that's not right. And you're like, but it does everything in the acceptance criteria. We've given you what you asked for. Yeah. And they're like, no, it's wrong. This isn't. And then you have another 2-week cycle time. And, you know, it's when the same thing keeps coming back and back and back, and it feels like the same, like, have another go. We're not going to tell you what you did wrong, you know. That can be really, really demotivating. And I think, you know, the biggest factor there is it's the length of the loop. It's the amount of time it takes to course correct and realize where you went wrong.
So I would like to kind of finish on a couple of questions. Error messages, they're the bane of developers' existence.
Yep.
But obviously, as developers, we write bad error messages.
Yep.
And we don't really know if there's a lot of ROI to investing in making really nice error messages and how it's... What advice do you give to developers with error messages?
So there are 4 characteristics of a good error message. You know, one of them is apologize. You know, it should always be written with "we're sorry," because, you know, at that point it's a dialogue between your system and the user. So first of all, you want to apologize. Second, you want to try and explain as much as you can about what happened. Third is you want to try and advise the user if there's anything they can do to work around this problem. And fourth is you want to keep a record of the fact that it happened so you can go and do some analysis based on where the hotspots and the errors in your system are taking place. I think I've remembered those correctly. There's another great essay about this stuff online. And it's amazing how often they're just like, you know, unexpected error. And you're like, okay, well, first of all, sorry, there was an unexpected error. Second, it was unexpected, which means you expected something and you didn't get it. So tell us what you expected and tell us what you got instead. And third, it's this kind of classic model. The web has been very, very forgiving because there's a lot of resilience baked into the fundamental architecture of it. And users are like, I'll press refresh, and if that doesn't work, I'll go back and forwards again. And just by building in the refresh and the back button, we created this very discoverable ecosystem for end users, which, people are like, I don't worry about getting stuck on the web because I know that back will always take me to where I got to. And so when you get an error message, like a page not found or something, it's like, okay, page not found, I'll back it up. I know how to deal with that constructively. And then, you get into more complex systems. So my phone at the moment, the compass is pointing south. I don't know why. There's no option, there's no error, there is nothing wrong, it's just pointing south. It's 180 degrees out of whack. I have no idea why that is. And there's no error message, there's no settings, there's no clue. It's just one of those things that they're like, it'll never go wrong. We don't need to handle it. I'm like, well, it did go wrong. And a lot of time the problem we have as developers with error messages is the thing that went wrong isn't our thing. We wrote some code that calls into somebody else's library or some dependency or calls a remote service. And we get back something that we can't explain because we don't understand it. But even then, I just think there is tremendous value in saying, look, we called the foreign currency pricing API expecting to get back a decimal number, and what we got back was text. So we don't understand what this means, and we can't really help you with the error message. But for the developer after you who's trying to diagnose that problem or work out what's going on with it, that's enough context to be really, really helpful to them in a way that just saying timeout.
Right.
What timed out? When? What was the timeout? How long did you wait? How long should you have waited? So.
Okay. Well, it's been fascinating talking to you.
Thank you very much for
I wanted to ask you lots more. I wanted to know, is dopamine real? Do developers really get dopamine shots when they fix a bug?
Yep. It is a real thing. Is it
like the dopamine you get when you take drugs?
It is exactly the same stuff. You can, the brain, when you clear the pit in Tetris, or when you finally get your code to compile, you get this little rush, and it is the addiction chemical. It's the neurotransmitter.
So should drug users take up coding?
No, but if you can build systems well enough, people will actually get addicted to working on them. Right. Which I think is one of the explanations for some of the more enterprise software solutions we've seen out there. But
right, okay.
So, yeah, it's real.
Oh, that's awesome. All right, well, that was great, and I look forward to seeing you next year. Thank you so much for coming to Sydney. Thank you for doing the keynote of NDC. And this is Adam Cogan signing off for SSW TV.